Welcome back to the Dreamatorium, my friends. Still with me after that little trip to the attic? Yeah, I felt that might leave you a bit unsettled. You know what really gets to me about Pearl's attic? It's how it started so innocent. Just a little girl, some dust motes dancing in the sunlight, and that music box playing its broken melody. But then there was that mitten, that perfect crimson mitten, just sitting there like a drop of blood on fresh snow. And Pearl, oh Pearl, the way she moved through that attic like she was reading something in the shadows that we couldn't see. The way she wrote in that notebook of hers, with those little flower doodles around the edges of pages that held, well, let's just say those weren't your typical diary entries. But here's the thing. That attic? That was just the beginning, because now we're heading somewhere else, somewhere where rusty swing sets creak in the twilight, and the trees are quite right. You know those playgrounds you see sometimes, the abandoned ones? The ones where the slides are just a little too steep, and the seesaws balance perfectly even when they shouldn't? Yeah, that kind of place. And in this playground, Pearl isn't alone. There's something else there, something that used to rule these woods before she came along, something that's learned the hard way what happens when you catch little Pearl's attention. Chapter 2, Playtime with Pearl, and let me tell you, this isn't the kind of playtime you remember from kindergarten. Remember how I said to keep a light on? Yeah, you might want to double-check those locks again. Because we were going, well, let's just say some games leave scars that never quite heal. Ready? No? Good. That's probably wise. Let's begin. The Red Harvest. Chapter 2. Playtime with Pearl. The ancient forest exhaled its bitter breath, tasting of loam and lingering sorrows. Thane's paws sank into the damp earth. With each measured step, he left a temporary stigmata that the ground swallowed greedily behind him. Perpetual twilight draped itself across his scarred form like a funeral shroud, while the twisted pines leaned close to whisper their secrets. A language of survival written in shadow and suffering that only he had been forced to learn. Through the spectral dimness, his path wound between trees that stood like ancient sentinels, their bark etched with the patterns of decay. Each trunk bore witness to his passage with cold indifference, their gnarled forms arranged with an unnatural deliberateness that spoke of careful design. The air hung thick with malevolence, every breath carrying the weight of countless agonies that had seeped into the soil beneath. Where the collar had once bit deep into his flesh, now a mantle of silver-threaded fur, caught what little light filtered through the canopy. Each strand a chronicle of torment transformed into terrible beauty. His muscles, though diminished by cruel captivity, moved with the fluid grace of one who had learned to dance to horror's hollow melody. He was no longer merely prey, but something more, a creature reshaped by systematic torment into an artwork of survival. The forest floor whispered beneath his paw steps, a susurration of fallen needles that spoke of paths taken and choices unmade. Here, in this realm of perpetual dusk, even the shadows cast by broken branches seemed to follow their own dark purpose. Each twist and turn a step in a ritual of fear. Thane moved through this twisted landscape with the precise caution of one who had learned that in this place, even randomness held hidden purpose, and chaos wore the mask of careful design. His keen senses, honed by necessity rather than nature, passed each subtle shift in the air. The cold pockets that signaled changing winds, the phosphorescent fungi that painted toxic constellations across fallen logs, all became signs in his endless litany of survival. Every detail fed into the instincts he had been forced to develop. Each sensation weighted against the cost of failure in this laboratory of horrors that had become his world. Where once the collar had carved its cruel signature, now grew a crown of wild, frost-touched fur that rippled like quicksilver in the half-light. Each silver strand held memories of pain crystallized into reluctant beauty. A living archive of torment transformed by time's slow alchemy. The scars beneath, no longer raw but refined by endless seasons, read like haunting footnotes upon his flesh. a testament of suffering written in a language only the tortured could truly comprehend. His musculature told its own tale of metamorphosis, each fibre and sinew rewritten by necessity's harsh editor. Though the wild symphony of the hunt no longer conducted his movements, something more intricate had taken its place. A complex dance of survival that required both strength and subtlety. His power had not diminished, but rather transmuted, like base metal, into dark gold. From the brute force of dominance into an architecture of resilience that even his tormentors could not fully comprehend. In the perpetual twilight of his existence, Thane had become both victim and survivor. Watching his own transformation with the detached understanding his captors had unknowingly taught him. Each adaptation, each carefully measured response to threat, fed into an ever-growing catalogue of survival strategies. His body moved now like a dark prayer made flesh, each motion a testament to life's stubborn persistence in the face of methodical cruelty. The forest around him seemed to recognize this change, its shadows reaching out to brush against his altered form with something approaching reverence. Here was a creature who had transcended simple categorization, who had taken the tools of his torment and fashioned them into keys for a prison that existed as much in the mind as in the physical world. Even the wind, whispering through the twisted pines, seemed to pause and recalculate its course around him, as if acknowledging that here was something that defied nature's ordinary rules. The clearing revealed itself like a wound in the forest's flesh, its unnatural emptiness an accusation against nature's wild sprawl. Here, childhood's domain had been corrupted into something darker, a space where even silence had been carefully cultivated. The air hung thick with phantom memories, the ghostly echoes of children's laughter long subtracted from this sum of absence. Rising from the taut canvas of dead grass, abandoned playground equipment stood like the fossilized remains of Joy's skeleton, each piece positioned with the devastating precision of a butterfly pinned to velvet. A rusted seesaw balanced with impossible perfection at its fulcrum, its empty seats weighing equal measures of silence against void. Nearby, a carousel listed at an angle that seemed random but suggested darker purpose, its warped form dissecting the twilight sky into fragments of tenebrous blue and dying light. Within this twisted sanctuary, Thane's consciousness expanded like dark wings unfurling, each sensory input weaving into patterns of survival. His steps carved silent testimony into the dead earth as his eyes traced the unnatural order of this manufactured nightmare. The temperature dropped according to some malevolent design, generating a cold that seemed to hunger rather than simply exist. Sound itself had been perverted here, wildlife's organic rhythms replaced by the metallic canticle of abandoned swings and the deliberate rhythm of rusted chains marking time like a death knell. His keen nose passed layers of history etched in scent. Beneath the bass notes of damp earth lay complex undertones of fear and pain that had leached into the soil's chemistry, creating a dark archive of torment. Each inhalation added to his understanding of this place's horrors. Thane's instincts, rewired by trauma's meticulous hands, processed this sensory assault with the cold efficiency of one who had learned to catalogue the infinite varieties of pain. The aberrant had become his baseline, each new violation of nature's laws merely another entry in his expanding grimoire of the unnatural. The noble wolf traversed this corruption of childhood's domain, his elongated shadow stretching across testament to humanity's capacity for creative malevolence. He moved like a ghost through this nightmare playground, his form both portent and witness in a story with no innocent ending. Here, in this inverted sanctuary where jungle gyms became gallows and slides, traced the trajectory of falling grace. His scars resonated with the environment's own wounds. The bitter ritual of survival played in his mind like a cruel music box, measuring odds in a game where every playground element had been transformed into an instrument of torment rather than mirth, each piece calibrated to extract maximum suffering from minimum joy. Then Pearl materialized within this carefully constructed nightmare, her entrance marked not by sound or movement, but by a subtle shifting of reality's fabric. The air parted around her small form like a dark curtain, the very atmosphere bending to accommodate her presence as she stepped into the clearing with the inevitable grace of a predator claiming its territory. Her pristine pinafore gleamed with unsettling perfection against the backdrop of strategic decay, a pristine white flag in this battlefield of broken dreams. Each step she took seemed to mark the ground beneath her polished shoes, her movements leaving invisible scars across the dead grass, as deliberate as a ritual dance. She brought with her not the chaotic energy of childhood, but something far more calculated, the measured pace of a natural force that had learned to harness its own power. The name they whispered, the Crimson Child, seemed less a nickname than a title, a designation for something that had evolved beyond simple humanity through her grandmother's dark tutelage. Pearl's eyes found Thane's with the unwavering focus of a practiced torturer finding her subject. Her gaze carried no malice, only the cool assessment of one who had transcended conventional morality. To her, he represented not prey or adversary, but canvas, a living medium for her ongoing exploration of pain's possibilities. Each minute adjustment of his posture, every flickering change in his bearing, became notation in her mental grimoire. The playground, her dark dominion, hummed with potential energy. Each piece of equipment poised like instruments in an orchestra of nightmares, awaiting their role in this grand performance of quantified suffering. In this moment, as Pearl's calculating presence filled the space, even the wind seemed to hold its breath, anticipating new verses about to be written in the endless hymn of torment. Pearl descended to one knee beside the rusted seesaw with the practiced grace of a priestess approaching her altar. Her small fingers traced the metallic decay as if reading ancient runes written in flaking paint and oxidation.
"Hello, Mr. Wolf,"
she chirped, her voice sweet as poisoned honey.
"See how the seesaw stays perfectly still. I barely weigh anything at all, but it doesn't tip over. Isn't that neat?"
Each word fell from her lips like carefully measured drops of venom rippling through the shadowed pools of Thane's consciousness.
"Want to play with me?"
she asked, tilting her head with a child's exaggerated movement, while her eyes remained sharp as surgeon's blades.
"Up and down, just like in the park. It'll be fun."
Thane's form became a study in contained power, each muscle fiber and nerve ending singing with the hyper-aware alertness of prey, evolved beyond simple fear. This was a dance whose steps had been carved into his very essence through repetition and pain. A ritual of power dynamics, choreographed through countless iterations of agony. His consciousness bloomed like a night-flowering corpse flower, each petal a possible path weighted with the accumulated wisdom of survival. Through the labyrinthine passages of his transformed mind flashed remembered rituals of pain, the artful placement of Pearl's traps, the measured pressure of confinement, the practiced edge of her tools. Each memory a dark brushstroke in the endless painting of existence versus extinction. Primal survival instincts warred with learned caution, creating ripples in the dark waters of his decision-making.
"Look what I brought you,"
Pearl sang out, her attention fixed on him with the unwavering focus of a snake watching its prey. From her lunchbox, that innocent disguise for her mobile chamber of horrors, she extracted a precisely cut morsel of meat.
"We have to do things in order,"
she explained, her voice sliding between playground simple and funeral solemn.
"That's what Grandma always says. First the test, then the treat."
The scent awakened cascading reactions in Thane's brain. Primitive hunger colliding with learned wariness. Each possible response unfurled like petals of a poisonous flower. Acceptance meant submission to her dark artistry. Refusal meant prolonged participation in her study of deprivation. Yet he recognized that choice itself was merely another stroke in Pearl's grand masterpiece, a controlled element in her ongoing exploration of will and surrender.
Be a good boy.
She coaxed, her voice taking on a sing-song quality as she held out the meat.
Good boys get rewards.
Their gazes locked in a moment that seemed to stretch like dark honey, thick with unspoken horrors. His eyes wells of accumulated suffering, hers bright with the cold light of dedicated malevolence. With movements that spoke of countless cruel lessons, Thane advanced. His jaws closed around the offering with a gentleness that represented not submission, but calculated survival, accepting his role as both canvas and brush in her ongoing study of transformation through trauma. Pearl clapped her hands together like any delighted child, but the sound cracked against the forest silence like breaking bones.
Good job! Now we can write down everything you did today in my special notebook.
And so, within this playground disguised as a torture chamber, where childhood wonder had been distilled into its darkest essence, their ritual continued its inexorable course. Pearl orchestrated her symphony of systematic cruelty with a child's enthusiasm for cruel games, while Thane, her most complex subject, performed his part in this ongoing study of suffering's infinite permutations. Pearl's shadow stretched across the rusted seesaws and swings, her small hand tracing an arc in the air as if conducting an invisible requiem. She flipped open her notebook, its pages filled with careful observations written in round, childish letters, each entry bordered with small drawings of flowers that did nothing to disguise the horror of their contents.
We're done with just watching you, Mr. Wolf,
she announced, bouncing slightly on her toes with barely contained excitement.
Now comes the fun part where we get to play together and see what you can do.
Her toolbox lay open beside her, sunlight catching the polished metal instruments inside like hungry teeth gleaming in the dark.
Grandma says you're special because you don't give up no matter what. That makes you perfect for my project.
Thane, once lord of these woods but now reduced to a subject in Pearl's twisted playroom, watched her with eyes that held more than mere animal awareness. Behind that golden gaze lurked an intelligence honed by pain, a mind that understood all too well the ritualistic nature of his torment. He understood now, understood with a clarity that came from both instinct and forced enlightenment, that he was not simply prey to be hunted. He was a crucial player in a ceremony designed long before his capture. Part of a legacy of cruelty passed down like a family heirloom from grandmother to child.
Grandma teaches me all about how animals change to stay alive,
Pearl continued, drawing patterns in the dirt with the toe of her polished shoe. She hummed a snippet of Ring Around the Rosie before adding,
We're going to find out just how much you can change before you break. Won't that be interesting?
Thane shifted, muscles coiling beneath his scarred pelt. He had become more than just another specimen in Pearl's collection. He was an unwilling participant in her nightmarish ritual, another sacrifice on the altar that shaped her young mind.
You have to help me,
she said, skipping closer with the carefree movement of any schoolgirl, though her eyes remained cold and focused as cemetery stones.
This is important work. Grandma says it will teach us all about pain and fear and surviving, just like a real scientist.
The wolf's understanding deepened with each passing moment. He was a piece in a ceremony whose rites had been written in blood generations ago. Pearl's dark artistry would either wear him away to nothing or reshape him into something that belonged in this place of twisted metal and corrupted innocence.
Time to start,
Pearl announced with the same delight she might show for opening birthday presents. But beneath her childish enthusiasm lay something ancient and terrible, the weight of her grandmother's teachings pressing down on her small shoulders like a crown of thorns. And Thane, both victim and unwilling participant in this cruel sacrament, steeled himself for another lesson in Pearl's dark curriculum. Thane's paws pressed into the forest floor, each step sinking into a carpet of decay that seemed eager to preserve his passage. Ahead, Pearl danced between shadows, her form flickering like a flame in a charnel house as she led him deeper into the woods. The phosphorescent fungi dotting their path cast an otherworldly glow, marking a trail that promised no return.
This way, Thane,
she called out with a child's sing-song lilt.
the pretty lights show us where to go, like a treasure hunt.
The wolf's eyes, bright with hard-earned wisdom, surveyed their surroundings, not seeking freedom, but reading the signs of what was to come. Every turn held purpose. Each clearing they entered had been consecrated with careful thought, though the pattern remained just beyond his grasp. The forest held its breath around them, its silence heavy with anticipation of Pearl's next ritual.
Can you hear how quiet it gets?
Pearl asked, her voice carrying the innocent wonder of a child discovering death's beauty. She stopped beside a tree whose bark bore markings that looked almost like childish scribbles, but weren't.
We're almost to my special place.
The ground seemed to shift beneath Thane's paws, subtle changes in texture and tension that spoke of careful preparation. Choice became illusion with each forward step, the path narrowing until only one direction remained, deeper into Pearl's dark sanctuary. Pearl clutched her notebook to her chest like a sacred text as she led the way, leaving small signs of her passage that Thane's enhanced senses couldn't help but notice. A deliberately placed leaf here, a carefully arranged pile of twigs there. The hunt had transformed into an intricate ceremony, with steps as precise as a Death Watch beetle's rhythmic tapping.
You're watching carefully, right?
Pearl glanced back, her voice carrying the same tone she might use to remind a classmate about homework.
We need to write everything down in my observation journal.
Thane answered with a soft rumble in his throat, acknowledging the familiar pattern of their interaction. The cabin's dark silhouette loomed closer. That place where Pearl's childhood games took on meanings that belonged in no child's world. Pearl halted before a clearing swept clean of debris, an unnatural circle in the forest's chaos. The space reminded Thane of an amphitheater where unspeakable performances were staged, every fallen leaf and twig removed with ritualistic care.
Time for a new game,
she announced with birthday party excitement.
Let's see how good you are at following directions.
The wolf remained motionless, fur rippling along his spine not from fear, but understanding. He had become both student and sacrifice in Pearl's twisted playroom, where every lesson left marks deeper than flesh.
That's right,
Pearl whispered, reaching toward him as if offering friendship, though they both knew better.
Stay just like that while I get everything ready.
The forest's unnatural quiet deepened as another chapter in their dark collaboration began, childhood curiosity warped by inheritance into something that would leave scars in memory rather than tissue. Thane's paws pressed into the sodden earth, leaving deep impressions that spoke of his weary passage. Pearl's small hand reached out, her fingers tracing the raised lines across his fur with the same careful attention she might give to reading a forbidden grimoire. Above them, the canopy of gnarled branches wove together like grasping fingers, their shadows performing an uneasy dance across the forest floor.
Look at all my notes about you, Thane,
Pearl whispered with the pride of a child showing off perfect test scores. Her notebook pages were filled with careful handwriting, each letter formed with painstaking precision, decorated with little drawings in the margins that somehow made the contents more chilling.
You're helping me learn so many new things. Isn't it exciting?
Her bright eyes turned toward the cabin that loomed against the darkening sky. It stood like a dark cathedral, where generations of her family had learned lessons that no child should know. Each experiment she conducted was another verse in her grandmother's terrible liturgy. A legacy, written in carefully documented observations.
Grandma always says we have more to learn,
she continued, hugging her notebook like a treasured relic.
Every day we discover new secrets about how things work and how they break.
In the heavy silence of the forest, Thane absorbed her words with the grim understanding that suffering had taught him. His senses, once focused on the simple instincts of survival, now worked to decode the arcane patterns of human cruelty contained within a child's form. The girl before him moved with the skipping grace of youth, yet each step followed pathways laid down by generations of careful study. Her childhood games had been replaced by dark rituals, her playtime transformed into ceremonies that echoed with the creaking of rusty swings behind them. As Pearl guided him forward, Thane recognized that he was more than just another specimen in her collection. He had become part of something larger and darker, a story that had begun long before him and would continue long after, written in the careful letters of a child's hand, but conceived in minds that saw the world through shadows. This understanding settled over him like evening frost, heavy with meanings that prickled at the edges of comprehension. Yet in this twisted sanctuary, Thane had learned to be more than a passive subject. Each response, each reaction, became his own careful ritual of survival. Pearl turned to face him, her expression carrying the serious concentration of a child reciting something vital learned by heart.
"We belong together now, Thane,"
she said, sounding for a moment like a little girl playing at being grown up, except for the terrible wisdom in her eyes.
"We're writing a story that's bigger than both of us, just like in Grandma's books."
Pearl hugged her notebook to her chest, bouncing slightly on her toes.
"But first,"
she whispered, her voice bright with genuine excitement,
"I need to get my playroom ready. Grandma says I can't start without setting up all my toys just right."
She spun in a little circle, her pinafore flaring out, the motion so innocently childlike it made the gleam in her eyes all the more terrible.
"Wait here,"
she commanded with the authority of a child used to being obeyed.
"I have the most wonderful new game for us to play."
As Thane watched her skip toward the cabin, her shadow stretching long and dark behind her, he understood that in Pearl's world, play meant something altogether different, something that belonged in the pages of her grandmother's grimoire rather than a child's storybook. Her steps traced old paths worn into the earth by countless similar journeys, each footfall echoing with the weight of inherited purpose. The cabin door creaked open on well-oiled hinges, a hungry mouth yawning wide to swallow her small form. Inside, shelves lined with mason jars caught the dying light, their contents casting twisted shadows on the walls. Pearl moved among them with practiced familiarity, her fingers dancing over labels written in her grandmother's spidery hand.
"Everything has to be perfect,"
she sang out, her voice carrying a melody that belonged in nursery rhymes, but somehow rang with darker undertones.
"Grandma says preparation is the most important part."
The sounds that followed spoke of metal against metal, of boxes being opened and instruments being arranged. Each clinking noise carried clear through the forest air to where Thane waited. Every sound, a promise of what was to come. He had learned to read this prelude like a familiar story, though one whose ending changed with each telling. Pearl emerged from the cabin carrying her treasured toolbox, once meant for sandwiches and apple juice, but now repurposed for darker sustenance. Rust bloomed across its painted daisies like dried blood, the metal catching the last rays of sunlight with predatory gleams.
"I organized everything special,"
she announced, her face glowing with the pride of a child showing off a particularly neat coloring book.
"See how pretty they all look lined up together."
Inside the box, silver instruments nestled in neat rows, their polished surfaces reflecting Pearl's smile in miniature. Tiny spatters of old stains decorated the corners where lunch crumbs might once have gathered, a testament to her evolution from schoolgirl to something far more exquisite. The sunlight dimmed as Pearl arranged her instruments on a small cloth spread across a fallen log, each piece placed with reverent care. Her movements held the solemn grace of a priest preparing for communion, though the sacrament she offered promised only pain.
"It's almost time,"
she said, her voice dropping to match the forest's hushed anticipation.
"The light is getting perfect."
Indeed, the dying day painted everything in shades of amber and crimson, as if nature itself bled in preparation for what was to come. The shadows stretched longer, reaching toward Thane with grasping fingers, while the wind whispered ancient secrets through the twisted pines. Above them, Clouds parted like stage curtains, allowing shafts of golden light to illuminate Pearl's workspace, as if directed by an unseen hand. The metal of her tools caught this light and held it, the instruments seeming to pulse with their own inner fire.
You know what Grandma always says?
Pearl asked, running her finger along the edge of something that gleamed too brightly to be a toy.
She says that understanding comes through transformation. That's such a pretty word, isn't it? Transformation.
She drew out each syllable like pulling thread through fabric, her voice carrying the same delight she might show when learning a new jump rope rhyme. But her eyes, fixed now on Thane, held something older than her years, something that had been crafted through generations of careful cultivation.
We're going to help each other transform,
she continued, selecting an instrument from her collection with the careful consideration of an artist choosing a brush.
You'll help me understand, and I'll help you become something new. Isn't that exciting?
The last rays of sunlight retreated from the clearing, leaving them in a twilight realm where childhood and cruelty danced together like shadow puppets. Pearl's white pinafore seemed to glow in the gathering dark, a beacon of false innocence in this theater of horrors.
Shall we begin?
She asked, rising from her preparation with fluid grace. In one hand, she held her chosen tool, in the other, her ever-present notebook.
I promise to write down everything we learned together.
And as night drew its dark curtain across the forest stage, Thane watched the girl approach, understanding that each step brought with it not just pain, but purpose. For in Pearl's world, suffering was not merely inflicted. It was studied, documented, and passed down like a family heirloom, each generation adding its own verses to an ever-growing symphony of torment. The moon rose to witness their dark communion, its light casting Pearl's shadow across the forest floor. The silhouette not of a child, but of something that childhood had become in the hands of those who saw innocence as merely another tool to be reshaped and repurposed. And in the distance, a music box began to play. You made it through the playground, did you? I've got to hand it to you. Watching Pearl at her games isn't for the faint of heart. The way she moves through that forest, treating it like her own private laboratory, it makes your soul itch, doesn't it? Those quiet moments when she's writing in her notebook, drawing little flowers around the edges while Thane, poor Thane, just waits, knowing what comes next. The thing about Pearl that truly burrows into your mind isn't the obvious horror. It's those little details. The skip in her step as she selects her tools. The way she hums nursery rhymes while she works. How she treats everything like a precious school project, each experiment carefully documented with a child's meticulous hand. Makes you wonder about every little girl you've ever seen playing alone, doesn't it? But listen, if you think Pearl's forest games were difficult to stomach, you might want to brace yourself. Because now we're following those tiny footsteps down into grandmother's basement. And this isn't some dusty storage space filled with cobwebs and old boxes. This is Pearl's true sanctuary, where she keeps her collection. Those shelves lined with glass jars, each one tells a story. Each one holds a lesson learned. The walls down there? They're decorated with drawings. The kind that would make a child psychologist lose sleep for weeks. Pearl's own private gallery, where she maps out her understanding of anatomy with crayons and first-hand experience. The air gets thicker as we approach those stairs, doesn't it? Each step down carries us deeper into what Pearl lovingly calls her playroom. Such a sweet name for such a dark space. But that's Pearl for you. Where other little girls might have tea parties and dress-up corners, she have her specimen jars and her special tools. Her own private sanctuary where childhood creativity meets grandmother's carefully cultivated cruelty. Listen closely as we descend. That's not just the wood creaking beneath our feet. There's something else down in Pearl's playroom, something waiting in the shadows, something eager to begin today's lessons. The shadows in the Dreamatorium grow deeper as we descend into Pearl's playroom. And this time, we might not all make it back out. We're not saying liking, commenting, and subscribing will protect you. But it couldn't hurt, right?